Before kings sealed their names in stone, there was the desert, and in that desert walked a watcher. Neither holy beast nor holy god, he kept the border no living eye could cross. The Egyptians called him Inpu, opener of the way. We would come to know him as Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of the dead. He did not hunt the living, he escorted the truth. For in the halls beyond dusk, every heart must speak without a tongue. There, on the scales of Ma'at, a single feather decides eternity. If the heart is light, the horizon opens. If heavy, the devourer waits. But judgment to him was not cruelty, it was clarity. He weighed not fame nor fear, but intention. He learned it first in sorrow, a hidden child found among dunes, raised to tend what ends so that meaning might begin. In silence he wrapped kings and beggars alike, teaching that death is a doorway, not a fall. Follow the torch through sand and stars. Tonight, we walk beside Anubis. Hear the desert wind, it remembers every name. Before the gods of Egypt wore crowns, before pyramids pierced the sky, there was only the desert, vast, endless, whispering secrets to no one. From that silence came a child not meant to exist. He was born of twilight, to a mother who could not keep him and a father who could not claim him. His mother was Nephthys, the goddess of night and lament, wife to Set, lord of storms and chaos. But her heart had wandered, drawn not to destruction, but to creation. In a moment between shadow and dawn, she lay with Osiris, the god of order, and conceived a son who belonged to neither realm. When the child came into the world, his cry echoed like thunder buried beneath sand. Nephthys trembled. She saw in him not innocence, but consequence. For Set's jealousy was as old as the desert itself, and she knew he would not forgive. So she hid the newborn in the dunes, wrapped in linen and silence, and fled into the darkness, leaving fate to find him. Days passed, or perhaps centuries, for time moves differently in the places gods abandon. And then, under the burning noon sun, a woman found the child. She was Isis, queen of magic, wife of Osiris, the very one whom Nephthys had betrayed. Yet when Isis looked upon the infant, she did not see a rival's blood. She saw potential, a spark between chaos and order, darkness and light. She lifted him gently, his eyes already open, golden like the horizon before dawn. She whispered, "You are not forgotten, little one. You will watch over what others fear." And so she raised him in secret, teaching him the words of the dead, the power of stillness, the purpose of endings. The child grew among tombs. He listened to the wind howl through hollow corridors of stone and heard in it the stories of souls who had lost their way. While other gods sought temples and worship, he sought understanding. He asked Isis, "Why do mortals cry when life ends?" And she answered, "Because they think love stops where breath stops." He pondered her words, and from that thought, his destiny took shape. He began to tend the fallen animals of the desert, covering them with sand, whispering to them as if they could still hear. He did not call it mercy. He called it continuation. Each burial was a lesson that what dies only changes form. When Osiris saw the boy's compassion, he was moved. He called him Ampu, meaning to decay and to renew. Osiris taught him the balance of the living and the dead, how the Nile floods not to destroy but to cleanse, how even darkness has purpose if it gives birth to light. But the peace would not last. Set, lord of storms, discovered the child's existence. He saw in Anubis not blood but betrayal made flesh. "Son of theft," Set thundered, "you are a scar upon my name." Yet Anubis did not answer. He simply looked upon Set with the calm of a god who already knew truth. "Even a scar," he said softly, "is proof that something has healed." Set struck him down in rage, but when the storm passed, Anubis stood unbroken. For silence, when pure, is stronger than any roar. From that day, Anubis walked the border no other dared. He learned to move unseen between sand and shadow, his eyes reflecting both night and sun. The jackal followed him, the creature that lives where life and death meet. Together they roamed the dunes, guarding the forgotten, burying the nameless. It was there he discovered the ancient rhythm of endings, how every heartbeat is a drumbeat of time, how every breath is both arrival and departure. He began to understand that death was not cruelty, but structure, the one law that even chaos must obey. And so, in the emptiness of the desert, the first god of transition was born. He would never crave power, nor demand worship. He would never sit upon a throne, for his kingdom was not of the living, but of meaning. In time, men would see his shadow in their dreams and call him guardian, not monster. His ears would hear every unspoken prayer uttered in fear or farewell. He would carry each soul not to judgment, but to understanding. His name would change with tongues and centuries, but his purpose would remain, to keep the balance between what ends and what begins again. He was born of secrecy, raised by mercy, forged in solitude, and from that silence, the jackal god of the dead opened his eyes. When the first mortals began to die, the gods looked away. Death was unshaped, a shadow with no path. Souls wandered the dunes, their whispers lost in the wind, their memories scattered like sand. No one knew where the line between life and afterlife began, until Anubis appeared. He did not come with thunder or flame. He came with silence, the silence that gives structure to sound. He watched the lost souls drift through the night and asked himself, if even gods return to dust, what becomes of the mortal heart? Anubis took the first soul by the hand. It trembled like a child. "Do not fear," he said softly. "The journey is not punishment, it is revelation." He led the spirit through a desert unseen by mortal eyes, where stars hung low like lanterns, lighting the road to the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. There the river flowed backward, carrying memories instead of water. And in that river, the soul saw its own reflection. Every truth it had hidden, every lie it had believed. At the gates of eternity, Anubis built his first scale. He placed a heart upon one side, and on the other, a single feather, the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth. "Let the weight of your heart reveal you," he said. If the heart was light, untainted by deceit, the soul would ascend into the eternal fields, a horizon of peace where time no longer devoured itself. If the heart was heavy, filled with unspoken cruelty or greed, it would sink, and the beast Amit would devour it whole. But Anubis was not the executioner. He was the observer. He never rejoiced in a soul's ascent, nor grieved its destruction. He only weighed, measured, understood. For his duty was not to punish, it was to reveal. The judgment did not come from him, but from the truth within each soul. And in this, he became the first god to show that morality is not obedience, but balance. As the centuries turned, the Egyptians began to whisper his name with reverence. They painted him on tomb walls as a figure black as night, with the head of a jackal, the creature that watches over the graves. To the living, he was no longer terror. He was order in darkness, the one who promised that every ending has form. Priests prayed to Ra for sunlight, but to Anubis they prayed for mercy, not to be spared from death, but to be guided through it. When a pharaoh died, Anubis stood unseen beside the priests, his presence felt in the rhythm of ritual. They would wash the body, anoint it with sacred oils, and wrap it in linen, each layer a prayer to time. And though their hands performed the rite, it was his spirit that oversaw it. They called him Imi-Ut, the one who is in the place of embalming. For Anubis had given them the art of mummification, not to preserve vanity, but to teach memory. Through him, they learned that remembrance is a form of eternity. Even the gods came to respect his domain. When Osiris rose as lord of the underworld, he did not command Anubis to kneel. He bowed instead. "For it was you," Osiris said, "who gave death its shape and the soul its mirror." Anubis only replied, "The dead are yours to rule, but their truth is mine to weigh." And so the hierarchy of eternity was born. Ra ruled the sky, Osiris ruled the afterlife, but Anubis ruled the moment between. That fragile instant when the breath leaves the body and memory becomes echo. He stood there, steady as the scales in his hands, ensuring that every passage, no matter how humble, was met with balance. To mortals, he became the promise that even in death, there was justice. To gods, he became the reminder that power without truth is hollow. And to himself, he remained what he had always been, a guardian of silence, a listener to the weight no sound can measure. For what is death, if not the universe pausing long enough to hear what a soul has truly become? Anubis did not ask for worship. He asked only that mortals live, so that their hearts would not tremble when he touched them. He did not seek to be loved, but to be understood. And in that understanding, he found what few gods ever did: peace. The age of balance did not last, for even among gods, envy is eternal. Set, lord of storms, brother to Osiris, looked upon the peace of Egypt and saw only shadow. He envied Osiris's throne, his love, his people's worship, and in his envy he plotted the first divine murder. When the feast was called, Set came bearing gifts, a coffin of perfect measure crafted of cedar and gold. He laughed as he placed it before the gods. Let us see which among us it fits best. Each god lay within, but the coffin was too long, too narrow, too small. Until Osiris stepped forward, the lid closed perfectly, and in that silence Set smiled. He sealed it with molten lead, cast it into the Nile, and from that moment the river carried not water but grief. Isis wept. Her tears filled the riverbanks. The world dimmed, as if even Ra himself turned his face away. Anubis watched from afar. He had known storms, but never loss. When he found the coffin washed ashore, half buried in sand, he knelt. He did not cry. He simply placed his hand upon the wood and whispered, "Even gods must return to the dust they shaped." Set, furious that the body had been found, tore it apart. 14 pieces scattered across Egypt. 14 echoes of betrayal. The world trembled beneath his wrath. The Nile bled red under the setting sun. Isis searched across deserts and deltas, gathering each fragment, guided only by grief and hope. And wherever she found a piece, Anubis was there. Silent, patient, binding flesh to memory, stitching eternity from ruin. He taught Isis how to preserve what remained, to wrap the divine body in linen, layer by layer, each fold a prayer to order, each knot a refusal to let chaos win. When all was done, they laid Osiris within a tomb of stone. Anubis anointed the body with sacred oils, his hands moving with reverence and precision. He did not mourn, he worked. For to him, grief was not a wound, it was duty. With each motion he whispered ancient words. Rise, not as flesh but as meaning, let decay become renewal. And under his care, Osiris's form grew whole again, not in life, but in essence. Thus was born the first mummification, and with it, the first bridge between mortality and eternity. When Osiris's eyes opened once more, he looked upon Anubis and said, "You have done what even creation could not. You have given death its purpose." But Anubis only bowed his head. "It was never mine to give," he replied. "I only reminded it to be gentle." Set storms roared for 7 nights. Thunder struck the desert, sand rose like fire. But the balance had already shifted. Osiris, though dead, was no longer gone. He had become the lord of the afterlife, the ruler of rebirth. And Anubis, his silent son, the craftsman of order, became his right hand, the one who prepares every soul for judgment. From that day, whenever the living buried their dead, they whispered his name. They did not fear the jackal-headed god. They feared the weight of their own hearts. In tombs lit by oil and incense, priests carved his image on walls. Tall, black as night, ears pointed to heaven, hands steady upon the scales. Every ritual, every wrapping of linen, every anointing of oil was a prayer to him, the god who mended what gods themselves had broken. But Anubis carried more than reverence. He carried remembrance. He knew that even gods could die, and so he vowed that no name, no soul would vanish into the wind. In his silence, he built the first temple of memory, not from stone, but from ritual. Every act of burial, every tear shed for the departed, became part of his worship. He gave humanity not a promise of immortality, but a map, a way to walk the dark without fear. And in that map, one truth glowed brighter than any star, that even when light is swallowed by shadow, there will always be one who guides. The jackal whose eyes never close, whose torch never dies, who waits patiently at the end of every road. He does not speak, he does not command, he simply opens the way. After Osiris ascended to his throne beneath the earth, a new order took root among the gods. The afterlife had a ruler, the living had a guide, and balance had finally found its shape. But for Anubis, peace came with distance. His work was sacred, yet solitary. He watched over every passage, stood at every threshold, but belonged to neither side. He was a god forever between worlds. Temples rose for Ra, songs were sung for Isis, offerings overflowed at the feet of Osiris. But for Anubis, no festivals, no golden statues, only the quiet of tombs and the prayers whispered through linen. The Egyptians did not forget him, they simply met him in silence. For how does one sing to death's keeper? How does one praise the stillness that all must one day meet? Night after night, Anubis walked the necropolises, his footsteps stirring dust that once was kings. He paused before each tomb, listening. The dead did not speak, but he heard them nonetheless. He heard their regrets, their gratitude, their longing. He became not only the god of the dead, but the god of empathy, the listener of souls. For in every heart he weighed, he saw the same fragile truth, that fear and love are born from the same place, the wish to endure. Sometimes even gods are haunted. He began to wonder, did any remember the one who guides but never rests? He looked upon the stars and asked, if all must pass through my hands, who will one day weigh mine? No answer came, only wind moving through corridors of stone, whispering his own name back to him. Anubis understood then that eternity, for some, is not reward, it is duty without end. Mortals came and went, dynasties rose and fell, the Nile flooded and receded, as constant as the breath of creation. Yet Anubis remained unchanged, a sentinel against oblivion. When plagues came, he stood unseen beside pyres of the dying. When wars raged, he guided soldiers whose bodies had been left behind. When a mother buried her child, he was there, not to take, but to accompany. And though no mortal saw him, many felt him. A breeze at the moment of loss, a stillness before the final sigh, the unspoken comfort that death is not absence, but arrival. Still, loneliness followed him like a shadow. He saw other gods bathed in worship, their names carved deep into temple walls. His, however, was written only in sand, and every storm rewrote it. He did not envy them, but he did wonder if being unseen was the price of being necessary. For what mortal looks with joy upon the face that meets them at their end? One night, as moonlight spilled over Thebes, Anubis stood upon a cliff overlooking the Valley of Kings. Below him, 1,000 tombs glimmered like stars in reverse, light buried beneath the earth, each a spark of remembrance. He knelt and touched the sand. It was warm, alive with memory. "These are my people," he whispered. "They do not call my name, but they walk the path I built." And for the first time he smiled, not with pride, but with acceptance. He realized that to be forgotten by the living is not the same as being absent from life. For as long as humans buried their dead with care, they carried his essence in every act. In that moment, the god of the dead found purpose renewed. He understood that worship is not measured by temples, but by tenderness, the love with which one lets go. He was not the end. He was the hand that eases endings. And though he would forever walk alone, his solitude was no longer sorrow. It was service. The jackal raised his gaze to the stars. The night was vast, but not empty. Every light above was a soul he had once guided. and through that infinite silence he walked onward, content to be the shadow that makes the light visible. The centuries passed, and kingdoms changed hands like grains of sand through the hourglass. Pharaohs rose, each calling himself a god, yet all were destined to lie beneath the same sky, wrapped in the same silence Anubis had woven ages ago. The living built monuments for eternity, but eternity belonged to him. In every tomb, his shadow lingered. Priests painted his black figure on golden walls, the jackal-headed guardian, hands steady upon the scales. In their prayers, they called him Imi-Ut, the one who was in the place of embalming. He was invoked in every act of care, not as conqueror, but as custodian. Each drop of oil, each knot of linen, each whispered spell was an echo of his promise, that death, tended with love, becomes transformation. When mortals closed the eyes of the dead, they were repeating his first gesture. When they lit torches to guide lost souls, they were carrying his flame. Anubis no longer needed temples, for every act of remembrance became one. He existed wherever compassion touched mortality. Across millennia, his symbol endured, the jackal, the scales, the feather. They appeared on amulets worn by peasants and on sarcophagi carved for kings. To touch his sigil was to touch balance, the assurance that justice waits even beyond breath. In a world ruled by storms and swords, Anubis remained the quiet truth that all power ends the same way, in the stillness of judgment. When the Greeks came to Egypt, they gave him another name, Hermanubis, the messenger between mortal and divine. Even as cultures merged and gods changed faces, his essence remained untouched. For every civilization eventually discovers what the Egyptians had already known, that memory is stronger than stone and compassion outlasts conquest. In Rome, his image stood beside Mercury. In the sands of Nubia, he was carved into rock. In distant libraries, his myth became philosophy, a lesson disguised as divinity. And though centuries would strip Egypt bare, his presence refused to vanish. Wherever death was met with dignity, he was there. In every candle lit beside the dying, in every tomb built not from fear but respect, his spirit endured. Even now, the desert keeps his silence. Tourists walk through the Valley of Kings, their footsteps echoing through corridors of time, unaware that the one who built those corridors still walks beside them, unseen but never absent. For Anubis was not a relic of superstition. He was, and remains, a philosophy carved in myth. He taught humanity that remembrance is sacred, that love is proven not in how we live, but in how we let go. The embalming halls he once blessed became the blueprint for medicine, for art, for every ritual that seeks to preserve meaning. From his hands came the birth of history itself, for what is history but the embalming of memory, wrapped in words instead of linen? Through him, mankind learned to look at time not as an enemy, but as a sculptor. Every ending it carves reveals the shape of what endures. Even the gods took heed. Ra, Lord of the Sun, looked down upon him and said, "Your silence speaks louder than all our thrones." And Anubis answered, "It is not silence, my lord. It is listening." For that was his true gift, not to command death, but to hear it. He listened to every whisper of regret, every sigh of farewell, every song sung by the living for the dead. And in that listening, he turned mortality into meaning. In time, humanity forgot his stories, but not his presence. The scales may have faded from temple walls, but they remained inside the human heart, that quiet awareness that truth and deceit are forever measured. Every culture that came after would carry a reflection of him. The angel who records, the ferryman who guides, the saint who comforts. Different names, same compassion. And so, though the sands buried his statues, they could not bury his lesson. Because Anubis was never a god of death. He was the god of continuance, of that sacred bridge between memory and eternity. Even now, when a mourner places a hand upon a grave, when a candle flickers in prayer, he is there, watching, waiting, guarding the threshold between loss and understanding. There comes a moment, even for gods, when the silence they keep begins to whisper back. For Anubis, that whisper was eternity itself. He had walked the halls of judgment for countless ages. He had weighed kings and beggars alike, watched empires rise and crumble into dust. He had seen every kind of heart, brave, cruel, kind, deceitful. And through them all, he began to see something constant. The heart, no matter how it beats, always longs to be understood. One night, as the desert slept under a river of stars, Anubis stood before his scales. They had measured 1,000 lifetimes, yet in their golden reflection he saw not the dead, but himself. He placed his own hand upon one side and the feather of Maat upon the other. The scales did not move. He smiled, for he understood, to weigh truth one must also become it. He looked across the endless dunes where wind erased every footprint, and he realized what his duty truly was. It was never about death, it was about clarity. For death, he knew now, was not the destroyer of meaning, it was the mirror of it. Each soul that passed through his hands was not being judged by the gods above, but by the truth it carried within. The scales did not reveal guilt, they revealed honesty. And that is why he never spoke of mercy, for mercy was already woven into truth itself. He remembered the child he once was, hidden among dunes, rescued by a goddess, raised in silence. He thought of the first burial he performed, the first tear he witnessed, the first lie a heart told itself before his scales. Every moment had been a thread, weaving him into something beyond divinity, a reflection of existence itself. Anubis began to see the universe not as a hierarchy of gods and mortals, but as a vast and sacred rhythm. Life was inhalation, death, exhalation, both parts of the same breath, the breath of creation. And so, he no longer saw separation between light and darkness, between beginning and end. He saw continuity. The same pulse that drove the Nile, that moved the stars, that stirred the heart of a dying man, moved through him as well. He began to speak softly to the souls he guided. "Do not fear me," he said. "I am only the silence that lets your truth be heard." And as he spoke, the dead no longer trembled. They began to walk beside him, their steps light as sand in the wind. They were not being taken away, they were being transformed. In that realization, Anubis felt something he had long forgotten: belonging. He understood now why Isis had saved him, why Osiris had trusted him, why the jackal had chosen to walk at his side. He was not the god of endings, he was the guardian of transitions, the sacred pause between breaths, the heartbeat between moments, the light that flickers before dawn. He turned his gaze toward humanity, still caught between fear and faith, and whispered, "You are not fragile because you die, you are beautiful because you remember." For memory, he knew, was the truest form of immortality, and that was his legacy, to teach mortals to hold the past not with chains of grief, but with hands of gratitude. The scales before him glowed once more. A single feather drifted downward, weightless, eternal. He watched it settle, and for the first time, he felt no boundary between himself and the souls he guided. He, too, was part of their journey, not above them, but among them. He realized then that gods are not born to rule mortals, but to remind them of what they already carry inside: the capacity for truth, for compassion, for peace. And as dawn broke over the desert, light spilling across endless sand, Anubis turned away from his scales. They no longer defined him. He no longer needed them. He walked into the horizon, his figure dissolving into gold and shadow. The jackal followed, its paws silent, its eyes bright with the reflection of 1,000 souls set free. Above them, the feather of Maat drifted upward, becoming sunlight. For the god of the dead had learned the oldest secret of all, that death is not the opposite of life. It is the proof that life once mattered. And in every truth he weighed, he found the same answer. The heart becomes light only when it learns to let go. The desert sleeps once more. The jackal's footsteps fade beneath the rising wind, and the scales of truth rest in perfect stillness. Anubis turns toward the horizon, his duty done, his silence now full of peace. Behind him lie the tombs of kings, before him the birth of light. For even death must bow to the coming of the sun. And as the first rays pierce the veil of night, gold spreads across the sand, carving the shape of a new god, one born not of shadow, but of flame. The sky opens, and the voice of dawn calls his name, Ra, the eternal light. The watcher rests, the light begins.